Hello, students. This week's lesson is all about the internal factors that can affect a business's performance. I'm not going to teach a full lesson this week, I promise. I just want to talk to a couple of the points that I have some experience in to help you to understand them a little bit better. I'm going to use my video, my virtual background here, just one moment. I have a picture behind me, and you can see the gentleman on this side. You may have seen his picture before. He's quite a famous person. His name is Karl Marx, and he wrote the Communist Manifesto. And I just wanted to, you might say, well, what on earth does that have to do with internal factors that influence a business? Well, actually, quite a lot. Now, you might ask yourself, what inspired Karl Marx to write the Communist Manifesto? Where was he? What was he seeing when he fathered communism, basically? And it might surprise you to know that he wasn't in his native Germany. He wasn't in Russia. Russia was not in any way communist at that point when he wrote this document. He was actually in the UK. And he was looking at the way that employers basically treated employees in Victorian England. And it was pretty devastating. You can see, actually, if I move out of the way, you can see a picture of a factory there in Victorian England. And back then, there was no sense of government regulation to protect the rights of the worker. It was very much, the workers were very much the victims of their capitalist owners. And the owners didn't really understand what they needed to do to drive performance in their employees. So they used a number of different methods, some of which were pretty horrific. And out of that came a philosophy of communism, which has since swept the world, first in Russia and now still very much in mainland China. So definitely this topic has consequences for the broader society. And I just want to talk through that a little bit with you. When I first moved back to my hometown, which is Hastings, St. Leonard's, I actually occupied the address right there. This is an actual picture of the little bungalow that I had when I first moved back. It's 181 Frederick Road. Now, what's significant about that, other than that it's the oldest building, I think, on Frederick Road, and definitely showed that way in terms of the draft on the inside, but it is the former gatehouse to something called the Hastings Union Workhouse, and that is the territory. It was clustered all around Frederick Road in Hastings. There is a picture of the residents of this workhouse, and down here you can see the buildings themselves as they existed well into the 1900s. So what was a workhouse? Well, basically, a workhouse was a concentration camp for poor people. Yes, I definitely did say that. The town did not want wealthy visitors to this rather posh Victorian seaside resort, basically, to have beggars begging for food when they came out of the railway station. And so the poor in town were basically imprisoned in a workhouse, for want of a better term. The working conditions there were absolutely appalling. I'm sure there were countless fatal work accidents, and basically what happened when someone died, they were basically buried down the alleyway, down Frederick Road. So pretty awful consequence to a very poor employer-employee relationship. So this is very, very real. Now, you were given a number of different theories to look at, and I know that can be very, very off-putting to some of you. What I can say about theories is this: they help us to understand things. They help us to explain certain behaviors or certain impacts of our actions. But no one theory has all of the answers. There's no such thing as a perfect theory. They all shed some insight. And we're looking at three particular theories as a part of this module. And I'm just going to go over them very briefly with you, sort of in some very plain language. And I want to describe in particular what these theories tell me and what I really wish I had understood when I was your age, because my employers paid a great deal of money because I did not understand these theories. Now, when I was your age, I strongly believed that money had great power to fix things, or to motivate employees, or to put things right. And that was a very, very strong belief system in me. Don't know exactly where it came from, but I was adamant that employee compensation, frankly, could solve an awful lot of issues. And shamefully, by some luck and circumstance, I moved into management at the age of 23. So not understanding what money can do and what it can't do was extremely expensive to my employers. And I just did a sort of a back of the napkin estimate as to how much money I threw away because I truly believed that if I gave people raises, they would be happy in all situations. And there are situations where that is true, but I would say somewhere between 10 and 20 million pounds was spent by me on things that were just not necessary. So I think this is a really important lesson, and I just wanted to highlight the three theories that we are looking at. The first one I'm going to put up here is by the gentleman on this side of me, Mr. Maslow. And Mr. Maslow had a very interesting set of theories that strongly influence business thinking today. He basically said that each of these blocks right here, sometimes represented in a triangle, are the most fundamental needs are on the bottom. And only once these needs are met, is there any point in meeting any needs that are above them. So the first set of needs are physiological needs for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, etc. If these needs are not met, meeting all of the other needs doesn't matter, because people will still obsess on these fundamental physiological needs. Once the physiological needs are met, then our safety needs kick in. And this has to do with personal security, employment, resources, health, and property, where we live, etc. Now, money is important to the physiological needs, obviously, and it's also pretty important to the safety needs as well. But once these are met, none of the needs above these needs have anything really to do with money. So money goes but so far in terms of taking care of employees. Once the fundamental needs are met, there are other things that work far, far better, believe me, than simply throwing money at a situation. So once the safety needs are met and the physiological needs are met, then our love and belonging needs kick in for friendship, intimacy, family, a sense of connection. These needs become very important, again, only once these needs are met. Once all of these needs are met, then esteem needs become important, such as respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom, interestingly enough. I've always thought that freedom was a pretty fundamental human need. But freedom only matters, according to Maslow, if our physiological safety and love and belonging needs are already addressed. Then freedom becomes important. And then ultimately, once all of these needs are met, then that is the foundation upon which we can self-actualize, which is a very complicated term for just being the very best that we are capable of being. That's really what it means. So I found this theory quite helpful because, again, I threw lots of money when people already had their basic needs met. And I was surprised that they just took the money for granted. Of course, they weren't upset with it, but it just didn't do what I thought it was supposed to do. So next, we look at Hertzberg. And again, each of these theories gives a slightly different angle, but they're all pretty much saying the same thing. So Hertzberg had a two-factor theory. And he looks at things in terms of job satisfaction over here and job dissatisfaction over on this side. And he sees these as totally separate issues. So let's start with job dissatisfiers. What causes people to feel frustrated in the workplace? Well, these are influenced by hygiene factors in terms of the job dissatisfaction. And these are things like working conditions. So you've heard a lot about the absence of adequate PPE, personal protective equipment. That would be a working conditions issue. It doesn't generate job satisfaction, but it definitely does generate job dissatisfaction if it's not in place. Co-worker relations is a very important job dissatisfier. If there are disgruntled employees in the workplace, it can lead to job dissatisfaction very quickly. Policies and procedures that don't necessarily make sense or seem overly restrictive. Again, they don't lead to job satisfaction, but they do lead to job dissatisfaction. Supervisor issues, supervisor relations, not surprisingly. I've heard it said that people quit supervisors, they don't quit companies. Interesting saying. And note here, base wage. So base wage is not a job satisfier. It is a job dissatisfier if your basic needs are not met. Very, very similar in this way to what Maslow said. But I thought that money would always satisfy. So if I doubled someone's pay, and I wasn't quite that reckless, but if I doubled someone's pay, I would expect them to be doubly satisfied. And instead, they were a little bit more satisfied, and it was taken for granted by the next week. And then they'd ask for another raise because they saw how easily it came. Now, motivating factors, interestingly enough, are not pay factors. Those are job dissatisfiers if they are not correctly in place. So motivating factors are things like achievement, recognition, responsibility, the work itself, working because the nature of the work is rewarding. Advancement, the potential to move ahead in your career is clearly a motivating factor, and personal growth is clearly a motivating factor. Interestingly enough, money is not, according to this theory. Now, I mention this because I've been working back in the UK now since 2010. And one thing that I can't help but notice is that there is sometimes a reluctance on the part of UK employers to express gratitude to their employees, to simply say a very specific and very genuine, heartfelt thank you. Now, I will say that at St. Leonard's Academy, at least to the teaching staff, I definitely get that sense of gratitude from our administration here. But I've not found that so much in the private sector in the UK, where I think a couple of words of appreciation would go a very long way and go vastly further than tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds could potentially take you. Again, very important stuff, because as a future business leader, you will be a steward of a budget. And if you try to throw money at problems that can't be fixed by money, it gets very, very expensive. So let's look at the third one. And again, a slightly different take, but you can see these are all pretty much saying the same thing in slightly different ways. So Mayo. So Mayo's theory of motivation, interestingly enough, he got his studies done in a factory setting. And literally what he did was he raised the lighting and lowered the lighting, and was surprised to see that both raising and lowering the lighting improved productivity. So what on earth could explain that? Well, by introducing change into the workplace, management was saying they care and they're paying attention, and employees respond to that. So basically, his theory of motivation says that it's all in working relationships. That far more than money, what employees care about, if their basic needs, remember, are met by money, if they're making a decent living wage, what they care about is the communication between management and workers. What they care about is management being involved much more in the working lives of employees. What they care about is teamwork, the team environment, and that these are the primary drivers to their success. So again, very, very different theories and very different perspectives. So I mention this because one of the things that I did in my career that, frankly, I regret to a large extent now, is that I went into operations and I fought off union organizing campaigns. Now, ironically, I'm the grandson of two granddads who had very, very different views on unions. My, my maternal grandfather was the proud shop steward of his cricket bat factory in Robertsbridge, and where he worked for many, many years. And you did not say anything nasty about unions in his presence, or you got the full extent of his passion for unions and the good that he saw that they could do in the workplace. My other granddad, my paternal granddad, drove the buses. And he was not in a union. And the unions came in to the local bus service in the 60s. And he decided that he didn't want to join. He thought he had a perfectly good working relationship with management, loved his job, and he decided not to join the union and ultimately had to retire as a result, I believe, of that decision. So I come from very polarized background when it comes to unions. Obviously, when you look at the conditions that Karl Marx saw, when you look at the workhouses that we had right here in Hastings on Frederick Road, it's understandable that there was a definite need for unions. However, it would be fair to say that particularly in the US and the UK, where union membership has dropped over time quite dramatically, most business leaders do not want unions in their organizations. Now, this view is a little bit different in a place like Germany, for example. I used to work for General Motors HR. I managed the outsourcing contract when I worked for Xerox. And half of our employees were German. And I had many, many meetings in Germany. The work council, as the unions are called in Germany, were some of the most helpful people at the table because they had their fingers right on the pulse. They could tell me what was going on and what decisions I needed to make. And I was always extremely grateful for their support. You don't get that same cozy relationship between management and unions in the US and the UK. My theory is that as union membership dropped, those that are in unions belong to the unions that were probably more radical and less mainstream. And so there's been a really polarizing effect. And in the US in particular, some of the unions there can be quite militant and disruptive when they get in. So management naturally wants to keep them out. But my thought process has changed a little bit, having gone in and busted a union organizing attempt in Lexington, Kentucky, one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. Because I believe that when there is a union organizing attempt, there are very, very legitimate issues tied to the motivation factors that we're talking about, that basically management is valuing different things than the employees are, and it's got so divergent that the employees reach out to a union to represent them to management to get things fixed. And in the cases where I've been, particularly the one I went into in Lexington, Kentucky, there were some mistakes that had been made that clearly contributed to the situation. And when you go in to fight a union, it always gets personal. I was personally attacked. We also, frankly, personally attacked the organizers, and it was just very messy indeed. And just to kind of give you an idea of how a small issue can trigger a union organizing attempt, can really drive employee dissatisfaction. And it's always the smallest things, not the bigger things. In Lexington, Kentucky, our average pay was higher than any other location that I had responsibility for. It was literally a good dollar an hour higher than the other locations, but it didn't stop that location from getting so dissatisfied that they reached out to the Communications Workers of America to potentially organize a union in that facility. So one of the issues, one of the major triggering issues, this is a tiny little thing, but it was incredibly important to the employees. Americans, as you know, like ice in their drinks. They consider that important. Very important. You wouldn't serve an American a cold drink without offering them ice, and rarely will they turn it down. Lexington, Kentucky is in a very, very hot environment in the summer. It's internal and it's a little bit southern, so it hits the most vicious part of the summer heat which can see temperatures day after day in the 30 degrees Celsius range. So it gets very, very hot. And having some ice in your drink is a way that Americans cool themselves and feel better about being in the intense heat. So in order to save some money, so there are silly things we do as well in saving money that cause problems. I didn't just throw money at things unnecessarily. Sometimes money wasn't spent when it should have been. To save money, a new type of ice machine was ordered, which did not have a hope of producing the amount of ice that was necessary for the employees to consume. And this became a major issue. We went through a very hot summer, and this literally was a triggering issue for a union organizing attempt. We were successful. We did manage by meeting with our employees on a very regular basis, opening our doors, listening a lot, listening to what people were really telling us. We were able to get a handle on the grievances, and we took action as quickly as we could to address them. And ultimately, they decided not to go down the path of a union. Had they decided to go down that path, the reality of the matter is that in the outsourcing business that we were in, there were no union organized operations that we were aware of. And the location would almost certainly have eventually closed had the union organizing attempt been successful. So it was, it was a lesson that I learned the hard way, that sometimes it's not the big things, it's the little tiny things that aggravate employee relations issues. It's those basic needs. It was having the ability to cool yourself with ice in the drinks that was vastly more important than the pay in that case. Now, everyone will say pay is more important. Obviously, if someone's offering a raise, I'm all for it. I don't know about you, but I suspect you would be as well. So it's there is benefit to paying employees appropriately, making sure that they are not worried about making ends meet is very, very important. But beyond that, money is of relatively little value when it comes to motivation. A heartfelt thank you, some recognition, a career path, an ice machine, if you like ice in your drinks, are vastly more effective and important. And I just wanted to go over those points with you. I hope that helps to explain these three, what sound like very complicated theories. They're not really at all. They just give a different aspect on saying, what motivates employees is not necessarily what businesses think. And by listening to our employees and by looking at their needs, we're able to do a much more effective job in running the business. Only one more lesson after this. It is going to be on external factors influencing a business. And I'll have a couple of comments on that, but again, I won't have a full lesson as we're at the end of the calendar year now. Definitely really appreciate everybody who's been coming to class, doing the work. And I know that you're doing this because you're choosing to, and that makes it extra special that you're doing this. I think I've already shared there are no sanctions for not doing the work because we don't know the reason why the work couldn't be done. But having said that, there are always consequences, and the consequence, the positive consequence of you working on these lessons right now is the impact that it has versus others in your cohort. Because what will almost certainly happen is that this time will get factored in somehow to the final evaluation. And if you've used this time wisely, if you've studied all the way through it, then you are putting yourself at a very good advantage versus everybody else. So I do encourage everybody, if you've not had the chance to get all of your lessons done, I know how incredibly confusing this situation was, and the impact that it had. I was bewildered for a number of weeks myself, so I definitely understand that. But if you are now just coming around and realizing that you've got some work to do to get caught up, it is simply, I achieved Unit 1, and what I would ask you to do is focus on the content first. That is what you will be mock examined on in October. I am going straight into Unit 2 when we get back, because I am not going to shortchange you on the project. That is a mistake that I made last year, and life is too short to make the same mistake multiple times. Thanks so much. I'll talk with you again next week. Enjoy this week's lesson. And again, 3 different choices to evidence your learning, and they will be on class charts and the email that I send out. Take care now.